Sallie exhaled as she let her body sink back on the uncomfortable chair in front of the desk with her laptop on it, and then took a deep breath. She knew she should reread the message once again before sending it, but something inside of her was against informing her friend back at college at all. It felt strange. The whole message should be deleted, it told her. She would worry Cora, and her friend had enough other stuff on her plate. Then again, she had promised her to keep her up to date with everything, and Cora would worry even more if she sent her nothing at all, right? Well, Cora would worry anyway, no matter what she did. Her friend had those motherly instincts down to an art, after all. Sallie smiled and scooted forward a bit, looking at the screen with the far too long message she had decided to send us an email. Not using those instant messages really had its benefits, she thought, then nodded and began reading. Hi, Cora. I got into town yesterday evening, and I have to admit, I really somehow missed this place. It only hit me once I stepped out of the bus, but the place truly is beautiful, even though I could have never imagined myself wanting to return here. Maybe I should have come back sooner. Then again, I probably would have regretted it. Anyway, the town still looks exactly the same as the day I left. I could name pretty much every single person I came across as I walked down the road from the only bus stop to my parents' house. Well, my dad's house, I should say. Honestly, he looked great. It wasn't nearly as bad as I had imagined last weekend. He was dressed, he was showered, and he wasn't drunk at all. When he saw me, he hugged me so tight I thought something might break. But I have to admit that I absolutely missed it. I know. I've been telling everyone around us that I don't. But I guess I do after all. It was kind of strange seeing him again, though. I don't know how to say it exactly, but I thought he would look different, you know? After Mom died, I was pretty sure I would be coming back to a husk of a man. They were married for close to 30 years, and she's only been dead for 6 months. But he could still smile. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but seeing him that happy, it kind of bothered me, to be honest. Not that I want him to be miserable, but I always imagined my parents as not being able to live without each other. Then again, maybe that's just one of my childish fantasies. He pulled me in and made us coffee, then showed me up to my old room. Man, I haven't been here in almost 6 years, and it looked just the way I left it. Everything, even the posters. It's all still there. I've been sitting at my desk, staring out of the window and into the woods behind my dad's house. He's still the owner, by the way. Even though he had planned to sell off some of the land, he's changed his mind, apparently. Well, it's not like he needs the money, after all. And I'm sure the upkeep alone keeps him busy, so maybe that's a good thing. I took a stroll around town yesterday evening and met with some people I used to know. The neighbor's daughter, Emily, for example. She's a year older than me. And I think you'd love her, even if there are definitely some topics you guys would argue about. After I left, she stayed here in this town, and now she's pretty much the local hairdresser. which means she knows everything about everyone. Talking to her really was a lot of fun. But there are also a few very, very disturbing things going on around town. For the past few months, people have died here in increasing numbers. And the town itself somehow seems unlucky. That's what she said, at least. Old Mr. Miller slipped 2 months back and broke his arm. Got back from the hospital, slipped again and tore his ACL. Mrs. Reinhold almost lost everything last month when her water heater blew up and tore a hole through her roof. 2 weeks ago, 2 of the children went missing and only one was found again. And there are a myriad of other smaller things going on. Feuds that seem to reignite, families breaking apart, that kind of stuff. Emily told me that it's not normal for there to be this much hate, distrust, and bad luck going around, but I don't know. From what I can remember, this town has always been strange. We used to have this other neighbor who was a total nutcase. He was coming over once a week, trying to get over the fence and into the woods that are our backyard, screaming about needing something. I remember Dad and the guy coming to blows a few times before the sheriff finally intervened. After that, the guy never turned up again. I don't know if he just moved away or if he died, but his house got sold soon after and Emily's parents still live there. I mean, yeah, you can probably find hundreds of stories like that in every single town. But this one definitely isn't sane by any measurement. Dad's already asked me what I want for dinner, and I'm gonna help him with the cooking, so I have to end my story here. I'm gonna spend the rest of the day lounging around or walking through the town. Maybe I'll take a quick look at the woods behind the house too. There's a tree a bit further in, and I carved my initials into the bark when I was about 7. If I find it, I'll send you a picture. Pinky promise. I hope everything's okay on your end too. I'll talk to you soon. Sallie shook her head softly, then sent the email and stood up. Yes, this town had always been a bit strange, and she was happy that her life had already led her somewhere else. But it was still kind of comforting to return home once in a while. She closed the laptop, turned and walked out of her old room. It was 10:15 in the morning, which was kind of early to start cooking, and there was no sign of her dad inside the house, so Sallie put on her shoes and stepped out into the backyard. The wooden fence toward Emily's parents' house had been painted over shortly, she could see, and her dad seemed to have ramped up security around the place as well. Sallie could see a new metal fence starting at the wooden one, then running into the woods. When had he started fencing in his property? As far as she remembered, the woods behind the house had always been open, and the metal barrier here looked almost pristine. It couldn't have happened more than a few months ago, which meant he had done so once Mum had died, right? Sallie could feel a cold breeze on her skin as she slowly started walking along the fence. It really was running through the woods, she thought, rounded a tree and then continued moving along the barrier. Maybe Dad had seen something out there. A bear or wolves? Sallie shook her head. That was unlikely. She had never seen tracks of either, and if Dad had thought they could be around, he would have fenced off his property decades ago. Her feet carried her deeper into the woods, where the light got dimmer and the air felt a bit colder. There were birds around her, singing, but to Sallie's ears it sounded a bit off. She could feel it in the air, a strange shift. The further she went, the less at ease she felt. Sallie continued on and realized that the fence had been put here methodically. She wasn't sure if her dad had done so himself, because if he had, this must have taken him weeks or months even. There wasn't a single gap anywhere. Every strut that had been sunk into the ground felt solid, and even every tree that could have stood in the barrier's way had been cut down. Why? That was the question that didn't let up in her mind. Why had her dad done this? What was the point? She looked out through the fence and felt even stranger. It was almost like staring out of the bars of a prison. Had he tried keeping something out or in? Sallie wanted to chuckle and laugh it off, but some part of her didn't find anything funny about that at all. Had her dad lost his mind? What was the plan here? Maybe she should ask him once he was back. Sallie walked on and looked ahead. The fence was still going, disappearing behind some trees in the distance. How much of that forest did her dad own? She had never bothered to ask him, but if he had put up a fence, he would need planning permission for it, right? Which meant he'd had to prove that this really was his property. How rich was he? Sallie marched on, then suddenly heard something from her side and stopped. It was the sound of someone walking around the forest close by. Her dad. She could ask him about it all right now. Sallie turned and started to jog away from the fence. Was it all a sign of his grief? That was probably it. Instead of facing reality, he had thrown himself into a project like that. It wasn't healthy. Maybe she could talk to him, tell him that he needed to stop running away from it all. She could help him heal. Sallie rounded some bushes and suddenly found herself standing in a clearing. Someone had painstakingly cut down all the trees in a circle that was at least 40 steps wide, had cut out the underbrush and even leveled the ground here. What the fuck? Sallie hissed as she felt another icy breeze on her skin. She turned and looked around. The clearing was an almost perfect circle. It was sunny, open, and seemed completely disconnected from the forest surrounding it. Somewhere close by, another twig broke. "Dad?" she shouted, and heard her voice echo back from the trees. No one answered her. She repeated the question and took a step toward the center of the clearing. Still, no reply. But she could hear someone around here. Sallie started walking more quickly now. The trees surrounding the clearing looked old and weathered, but there was one spot that seemed completely covered by shadows. And the sounds of someone walking around were coming from there. "Dad? Are you there?" she asked again, while she moved toward that strangely dark spot. He still didn't answer. But it had to be him, right? No one else could be here, especially with the fence surrounding this part of the forest. She reached the edge of the clearing, stepped into the shadows, and suddenly felt a rush of cold air blowing right in her face. Sallie groaned and raised a hand to shield her eyes. Something was wrong here, a part of her wound. The breeze sounded like whispers coming from the dark to her ears. She could feel a presence close by, This wasn't part of the house she had grown up in, her mind told her. It wasn't safe here. She took another step and looked up. Cold air was still blowing in her face, but now she forced herself to ignore it, to keep her eyes open. Something was in front of her. She could feel it so clearly, this cold, ominous presence. Sallie took another step and suddenly felt the breeze disappear as she found herself in a dark part of the forest, standing in front of something man-made. She furrowed her brow and shook her head for a second. What the fuck? The words tumbled out of her mouth as she still tried to understand what this thing was doing here. A bridge. A wooden one. But it wasn't leading over or across anything. Its pillars were sunken into the ground, but there was no sign of a river being here. Sallie thought back to her childhood. No, she had never seen one then either. She couldn't even remember ever hearing the sound of running water out here. Carefully, she took another step closer, reached out, and touched the wood of the bridge's railing. It felt colder than the air around her. What was this thing? Had Dad built it as well? It didn't look very new, but someone had clearly tried to restore it. Sallie took a step onto the bridge and heard the wooden plank groan under her weight. The bridge itself looked normal, but it felt different. Something was up with it. All of Sallie's instincts howled in unison. She shouldn't be here. This wasn't a place where she should wander. Her hand was still on the railing that vibrated in the rhythm of her steps. There was something up ahead. A dark jar. It was atop the railing on her right. The moment Sallie noticed it, her feet stopped. She could feel cold sweat running down her back. It almost looked like an urn, her instincts warned, and she felt her stomach cramping up. Her legs took a step back without her input. It felt like something was pushing her, or her body wanted to leave as quickly and quietly as possible. This place here was wrong. She knew. She felt it deep in her bones. Whoever had built it had done something bad. She felt herself going backwards quicker now. The boards beneath her shoes were groaning, and the soft breeze that blew from her back was filled with more whispers. Somewhere up front, someone took a step onto the bridge, but Sallie couldn't see anyone. All she heard was a board in front of her creaking, and her body suddenly turned around to start running. Sallie listened to the wind brush past her ears, her own heartbeat, and the sound of someone chuckling behind her. She was racing through the clearing, past the trees and toward the house. It wasn't far away, she told herself. But someone was there with her, had seen her, and followed her onto the bridge. She needed to get away from there. She broke through the underbrush as she finally crossed the clearing, felt twigs breaking beneath her soles as she ran, and listened for any sound of the other person coming after her. They didn't. At least she couldn't hear them. Still, she didn't slow down. Her body was in full-on flight mode. She could hardly concentrate on anything besides the trees rushing toward her, roots sticking out of the ground she had to vault over, and the sound of the wind blowing past her. It wasn't cold, she realized, but it didn't matter. Sallie only stopped once she managed to pull open the glass door to the house, then threw it shut behind her. Out of breath and on the brink of a breakdown, she looked back at the forest and its trees and thought she could see someone standing there in the shadows, staring out at her and waving. Another door in the house fell shut, and Sallie screamed as she turned around, then saw her dad coming in the front entrance with a bag in his hand. "Everything all right, Sallie?" he asked, as his eyes narrowed. She could see how worried he looked, and felt her heart almost skip a beat. No, it couldn't have been him out in the forest, right? "Dad?" She almost stumbled over that single word. The room seemed to be spinning around her as her breathing got more and more ragged. She felt strange, like she wasn't getting enough air. Sallie heard an echo as the bag full of groceries hit the floor, and she took another stumbling step. Her mouth was dry, the room was spinning, and she couldn't breathe. She needed to tell him, warn him. Something was out there in his part of the forest. The world was growing darker with every racing beat of her heart. She was fainting, Sallie knew, but couldn't even concentrate on standing upright. The floor seemed to disappear beneath her, and a loud scream filled her ears as her dad tried to catch her. She woke up with a groan and a pounding headache, lying in the bed of her childhood. Sallie blinked and could see the world slowly coming into focus again. Someone was touching her, holding her hand. "Dad?" she asked, and heard her own, now raspy voice. The figure by her bed smiled and squeezed her hand even tighter for a moment. "You're up," he replied, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. Sallie tried to sit up, but a hand on her shoulder softly pushed her back down. "Stay. The doctor looked at you already and told me to keep you in bed. It seems you had a bit of a shock. What happened?" Sallie was too tired to struggle against a hand holding her down. Her mind felt slow, and her body was far too heavy. There's something out there, Dad." She finally managed to reply, and for a second, she thought she could see her father's eyes shifting. I saw it. A bridge." The hand left her shoulder and softly wiped her forehead. "Hush, Sallie. Don't think about that for now. You need to rest." She wanted to reply with something, but the expression on her father's face told her to stop. He looked worried and sad. Sallie groaned again. Never before in her life had she ever experienced fainting like that. What kind of shock had the doctor talked about? Something wasn't adding up. She closed her eyes for a moment and felt a hand leave her forehead. "The town is strange. Sick," Emily had told her. Her voice was now ringing in Sallie's ear as she heard her dad standing up from the chair next to her bed and slowly walking through the room. She blinked, opened her eyes, and could see his figure in the half-dark, standing by the door. "Sleep well, princess," he whispered, just like he had done when she had been a child. But something was different. Sallie felt wide awake in an instant, but forced herself to stay where she was. What was Dad wearing? She could see he wasn't in his everyday outfit, neither jeans nor a normal shirt, but a suit. He looked like he was on his way to some kind of event, a gala or something. She could feel her stomach cramping up again and the dizziness returning. Her dad stopped at the door to her room for another moment, looked back at her, and Sallie had to bite her cheek to not let out a shriek. That expression on his face, it was one of joy. He was looking forward to whatever he had planned and would leave her alone here, in her bed. What the hell was going on here? Sleep tight, she heard him saying, then saw him step outside in his suit, closing the door behind him. Sallie could feel her whole body trembling. She looked away from the door and toward the drawn curtains in front of the window. It was getting dark out there. Night was falling already. Had she missed the rest of the day? She felt another shiver as she remembered the feeling of running through the forest behind the house. The thing that had followed her. With that gone, she would be completely alone in here. Would this thing come after her again? Somewhere in the house, she could hear her father's footsteps. He was walking down the stairs. Should she have told him to stay? And what kind of place was he going to now? And why? With her in this state, was it really safe for him to leave her alone? Cora, her roommate, wouldn't have done that. She groaned, then heard the footsteps reach the first floor and turn. Something was wrong again, a part of her wound. She listened more closely. Dad was walking through the house, but not toward the garage or even the front door. No. His footsteps were coming through the floor, and her room was right above the entrance from the fenced-in backyard. A new chill gripped her, and she jumped out of her bed as silently as possible. Sallie was by the window the moment she heard the back door open, and felt a stinging pain in her head as her heart began racing. What was her father doing? Why had he dressed up like that? Why was he going out the back if the whole yard was fenced in? It was wrong. Something was completely off. Sallie reached the curtains and carefully pushed one side of them a tiny bit back. She could see the backyard and the setting sun illuminating the forest. There was movement below her. She could hear it. Someone was whistling softly. Sallie felt another stinging pain in her head, but her body already seemed less heavy and stiff. Was that the adrenaline? Probably. She watched as her dad walked away from the door and toward the forest. He stopped and stared back at her window, but Sallie knew he wouldn't be able to see her, standing there in the dark. The look on his face was strange. He was smiling, yes, but there was a sadness in his eyes. Maybe sorrow? She couldn't make heads or tails of it. A second passed with him staring before he finally turned and started walking toward the trees. Sallie felt another sting in her chest. This was wrong. Every single part of her mind screamed at her. He was up to something. She pulled herself away from the window, ran out of her room and down the stairs. Right now, she needed to follow him to find out what her dad was up to. But she wouldn't make the same mistake as before. Sallie ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, then turned and headed for the back door. She already knew where he would be going. At least some part of her did. Sallie looked out to make sure the air was clean, then quietly opened the door and ran barefoot over the lawn. She could see soft indents in the grass where her dad had stood before. A cool breeze hit her as she stopped for a moment, then set off again toward the trees. The shadows in there now looked far too dark, but Sallie didn't care. She had the knife in her hand. Something was up with her dad, and she needed to find out what. He was worrying her. Sallie reached the trees just as the sun sank down behind the horizon. She stopped and listened. Somewhere in front of her, a person was walking through the woods. Slowly. She nodded, took a breath and snuck into the shadows. The sounds around her seemed to change as she left the light behind. Somehow the whole forest now felt empty, besides the footfalls still coming from the distance. There were no birds or insects, only the footsteps and the sound of the wind. Sallie ducked and pressed her back against one of the trunks. She needed to be able to see her surroundings if she wanted to find out what her dad was up to now. Stumbling blindly through the forest wouldn't help her in the least. Sallie closed her eyes and listened to her own heartbeat. It was racing again, but this time she didn't feel like the world was spinning around her. No, this time she was in control. She concentrated on the shadows and slowly found the darkness growing weaker. It wasn't perfect, she thought, but at least she could move without stumbling over the roots. Sallie pushed herself off the tree and began sneaking through the shadows toward the place where she had heard the footfalls. What was her dad up to? Why had he put up the fence? What was that damn clearing and the bridge? She could feel that it was all connected, but suddenly stopped moving as the noise of the footfalls disappeared and left her alone in the dark. The temperature around her was sinking rapidly, and Sallie felt a shiver running through her body. She listened intently, but couldn't hear anything besides the low murmur of the wind blowing through the forest. Part of her warned her to turn around and leave, that this wasn't the place she should be. But another, even deeper desire to find out what exactly she had seen today made her stay. She took a deep breath, then a step forward, and suddenly heard a different sound again. Footsteps, but coming from more than a single person. Dad had met someone there. Sallie couldn't wait any longer. She shot forward, rounded a tree, then stopped as her eyes fell upon the clearing she had seen during the day. It was bright there. Moonlight was falling into the circle, illuminating two figures moving there. Rhythmically. She could see her dad's back as he was holding on to someone and then swaying side to side. They were dancing. The two figures twirled around, and for a single moment, Sallie could see the other person. "Mom?" she asked, and her voice cut through the silence and made the two figures in the clearing stop. Eyes fell upon her. Her dad's, her mom's, and a third pair that made the blood freeze in her veins. They were dark red, and exactly the same as she had seen today, before she had collapsed. She felt a cold breeze, then a rushing of wind as her dad let go of her mom and took a step, but suddenly stopped. Sallie felt it. The eyes that had looked at her were gone, but that didn't mean she was safe. Right behind her, someone breathed. A hand grabbed her by the neck and squeezed hard as dark red eyes burrowed into her. "Devil!" Her dad's voice rang out, echoing across the clearing, and the presence behind Sallie froze up completely.
"A deal is a deal,"
she heard a smarmy voice right beside her ear. She could see it out of the corner of her eye. The man standing behind her, leaning over her shoulder, had the most cruel eyes she had ever seen. He was wearing a suit too, but the hand holding onto her neck was shining in a dark purple.
"Let her go. She is not part of this."
Sallie could see her dad running toward them, while the figure of her mum kept standing in the middle of the clearing, her face a mask of pure terror.
"Do not break my deals, old friend,"
the oily voice said, sounding half amused. but also almost bored.
She is not part of this. I gave you access to this town, not her.
Sallie could see the fear in her father's eyes as he stopped short of leaving the clearing, his hands up in a placating gesture. Cold fingers were digging into her neck, and she yelped in pain.
She is here.
That damned voice said smugly.
She is part of this now. If you want to know, she even set foot on the bridge today.
Sallie could see her dad's face going pale.
No,
he whispered, and that response elicited a cruel laugh from the figure still holding her by the neck.
Yes,
the voice crowed, delighting in the fear even she could hear from her dad. Sallie struggled against the grip, but felt the figure only squeezing her harder. She couldn't stand it. The pain was getting worse. With a growl, she grabbed the kitchen knife even more tightly, swung it back and plunged it into the thing standing behind her. A short, cruel laugh echoed around the forest, and the monster holding on to her didn't even flinch. Not only that, it didn't bother to move or acknowledge the knife sticking into its body.
She walked onto the bridge, which means payment is due,
the voice announced, and Sallie could see her dad shaking from head to toe. His eyes shifted from her to it, then back.
Please, don't. Just let her go.
She heard him beg, but the thing standing behind her only laughed.
A deal is a deal. I get access to the town. You get to see your wife once a week. But what will you give me for your daughter's soul?
Sallie could see tears swimming in her father's eyes. A hand appeared next to her head, and with a snip of its fingers, she could see Mom suddenly disintegrating and a cloud of darkness whizzing away toward the edge of the clearing where the bridge was.
What will you give me? Because if you want your wife back...
The hand squeezed her neck again, and Sallie whimpered in pain. Her dad was standing there, shaking his head. She could feel his fear as the monster in her back chuckled mercilessly. Suddenly, Sallie's father stopped trembling, and his eyes focused on the thing in her back. He nodded once, and the grip around her neck disappeared. Sallie fell to the ground and watched as the thing stepped over her, not giving her another glance. It headed straight for her father, grabbed him by the shoulder and dragged him across the clearing. He wasn't struggling or fighting. She tried to run after, but stumbled and fell. Sallie wanted to scream, but her voice kept in her throat. He was already halfway across the clearing before she finally managed to set foot into the moonlight. Sallie coughed and ran, but stumbled again as her dad looked back at her, now smiling softly. What was happening? She had to help him. Her legs almost buckled again, but she managed to take a few steps. The thing dragging her father along had already reached the edge of the clearing on the other side. Sallie could hear it whistling. She forced herself to ignore the pain and dizziness, to keep running. A cold breeze hit her in the face as the figure in front of her disappeared in the shadows. Sallie cried out and fell, got back to her feet, and stumbled on. Right in front of the trees, she could see the kitchen knife lying in the grass. There was no blood on it. She didn't care. Sallie pushed on, into the shadows, and braced against the ice-cold wind whipping her in the face. Dad was somewhere in front of her. She knew it, could feel it. The sound of feet stomping on wooden boards reached her ears. Her hand grabbed hold of a tree as she broke through the wind, then stopped suddenly. The bridge was up ahead, but it was burning. She could see dark flames shooting up toward the sky, while on it, 2 figures stood. Her dad and the monster. He was looking at her while grinning from ear to ear.
Come back if you want to make a deal as well, little girl.
And cackled, then dragged her father into the flames and disappeared. Sallie felt the world spinning around her. Her legs were made of rubber as she sank down to the forest floor. The bridge was quiet again, empty. There was no sign of anyone having been there mere moments before. The world began to spin. Her dad was gone. She knew it, felt it. He had made a deal here and had paid the price. Sallie felt herself falling down onto the ground. Her breathing was ragged and her heart was racing out of control. Darkness was encroaching on her, yet all the while, as her consciousness faded, she could hear a voice, cruel and old, laughing at her misery.